In this video, I'm going to go ahead and get set up with the actual classes that we're going to need as well as a module. So basically, let's go ahead and go to our IDE. What we're going to be creating is a player controller, a player state, and a player character class. With that as well, we're going to be creating a module, which is going to be our core module. Now, this core module is going to be used for a couple of things. It's going to hold our interfaces, and it's going to hold our, whatever data tags or universal data types, such as our structures, that we may need to make and use across many other modules. So, for example, one of those is going to be the input delegator interface. Now, what this is going to be responsible for is it's going to be on our player character, and what it can do is our inputs basically getting handled through it. Okay, that was a pretty bad example. So on our player controller, we're going to be binding to our inputs. So, our typical enhanced input component. We're going to be passing those through the input delegator to whatever pawn we are possessing. So this way, instead of writing, set up player input component on each individual pawn and going through the inputs through the map, setting up the mapping context that way, we can do them in one place on our player controller, and then basically just kind of relay the inputs down to the pawn. That's really pretty much it. So with that said, let's go ahead and begin. So the first things first, let's go ahead and create that module. Now, if you don't have Writer, I do have videos on how to create a module from scratch. So if you go to my channel, search the word module, it really should just come right up. So once we have that, let's just name it core module and press OK. So let that go ahead and do its thing. I'm not too worried about any of this stuff here. We just want to go ahead and basically make a new interface. So under the public folder, let's add a Unreal class, and we want it to be a interface. So I'm going to make a child folder. So we have public and interfaces. So public interfaces, input delegator, input delegator interface, and press OK. So this is going to be our basically input delegator, class. So it's going to be responsible for things like move, look, jump. Well, jump's going to be an ability, but any input that is not, say, driven from, an ability, we're likely going to end up having it be, passed through from this interface. So we want to copy the core module API, go to our U input delegator interface, and paste it right there so we can go ahead and export this class out. And here's where we're going to have our functions. We don't have any yet, so we can actually close those classes out and delete the interfaces folder from the private section that it created, because we don't have a use for it. Okay, we have our core module. Now let's go to our SKG zombies, and we want to create a new Unreal class, and this one is going to be our player controller. So I think that's we can select from here. And the folder we want to put that in, make sure public is selected so it separates the public and private folders. And actually, I'm going to do this one from Unreal, so you can hopefully kind of follow along a little bit better if you're more new. C++ classes. We're going to create a new C++ class. Let's find player controller. And we want it to be in this SKG zombies module. So select public, and this will separate the public and private folders like this. And we want it to be inside of a folder called player. So we're basically going to have our player controller and our player state inside of this player folder. So from here, let's just call this one, not exactly sure what a couple of good names would be. I don't want to say zombies player controller because that's not, let me think of a name really quick. Okay, so I've decided to prefix the classes with SKG because the main project in the main module is SKG zombies. So I'm just going to name it SKG player controller, like so, and just create the class. So That's going to go ahead and do its thing. So okay, it's locked up. So I'll see you when that's done. All right, so it just finished, and that's partially why I don't like doing it that way, because it just rebuilt everything. So we can close down the player controller, and inside of that player folder, we're going to make another Unreal class, and this one's going to be the player state. So SKG player state. All right, so we have the player state, and we have the player controller. And actually, yeah, I already know. So once we have those two, on our public folder, we want to create a new class. It's going to be of character. Now, I had mentioned in a previous video, I'm not sure if we're going to make use of mover in the future or not, but this is, we're basically going to be writing it to where hopefully, if we do decide to make that change over to mover, there's going to be very minimal stuff that we actually need to change in order to, go from the character class to the pawn, which is going to be our mover class. So likewise, with that in mind, I'm also going to start kind of naming stuff with the word pawn rather than character. So we have our public folder. Let's make a new one called pawns. And we're going to name this class SKG pawn. And press OK. And there we go. So let's go ahead and clean up some things that we don't necessarily need at the moment. So on the pawn, we can remove our tick and set up player input component functions. I'm going to remove the comments because, quite frankly, they more or less annoy me. Because, constructor sets the default values. I think we know that by now. What does begin play do? We know. Same thing with tick and whatnot. So let's go ahead and remove those. Then for primary actor tick, B can never tick, we're going to set that to false because we, are already going to be in control of that. Potentially from somewhere else, or we're just not going to actually be ticking this pawn, which is the most likely case. So let's check the player controller. That is empty, what we want, and the player state is also empty, which is what we want. So I'm going to close down out of the editor and recompile. Alrighty, so now that that is up, I'm going to go ahead and launch the project. And realistically, there's not much else to do at the moment. Basically with the plant, actually we do need to do some stuff. So we're going to go ahead and I'm just going to let this load. I'll be right back here in a second. Okay. So we do need to go ahead and use this core module. So we want to add it to our SKG pawn. So let's go to our build.cs, so skgzombies.build.cs, and we can remove those because we don't care. And we want to add to our public dependencies the core module. So, that module we made earlier. And that's going to allow us to inherit the input delegator interface to our pawn class. So under include, let's go ahead and include interfaces input delegator interface.h. And it should pick it up here in a little bit. We just added that module. And we want to inherit the I input delegator interface. So once we have that, we can go to our player controller and go ahead and override the setup. What was it? Setup input component, right? Yeah, setup input component. And of course it puts it in line like so. So what we're going to be doing is handling things from here and passing them along. So for example, on the interface, we're going to have a function called move, and it's going to take in the input. Crap, I can't remember what the name is. The F input something, whatever gets passed along. And inside of the player controller, we're going to be binding to our input mapping context and our input actions and calling functions on them, or sorry, not calling functions on them. They're going to be calling functions inside of this player controller. Once we do that, we're going to be getting the input delegator interface from whatever pawn. So just, get pawn, input delegator interface. And then we're basically just going to be passing it along, such as if we're in the move function, we're going to call move and pass in, input data or whatever that parameter ends up being called. So that's the idea overall kind of behind this. And that's what we're going to start on in the next video. So basically in the next video, we're going to get the remainder of the pawn set up. So we need the camera component, the shooter pawn component, the ability system component, that kind of stuff. And we're going to start passing that information along to our pawn. So that's actually probably going to be split into two videos because we actually need the components first so we can spawn and possess and actually, see through the eyes of the pawn. So that's likely something we're going to actually have to do first. But anyways, we will get there when we get there. So with that said, I will see you in the next video.